I'm going to tell you the whole thing, the slow, ugly unraveling and the way I learned to stitch my life back together stitch by stitch, because I promised myself I would get the story straight for me, and because I finally wanted the sound of my own truth to drown out the gossip. I was 18 and in my final year of high school when the person I trusted like family turned my life into a story she could sell for attention. Vivian was supposed to be my shelter. She had been that for years, the loud laugh on dull mornings, the person who knew the exact snack I wanted when I walked into the common room, the friend who could finish my sentences. We fit around each other like old puzzle pieces. I told her things I never told anyone else, small humiliations and huge fears, and she listened. When my world tilted under the weight of depression, she was the name I whispered into my phone at night. Later, when I almost didn't come back from that edge, I thought our history would be enough to steady me, enough to make her see the person I was beyond whatever rumors could be spun about me. I was wrong. February came with a sound like a slammed door. One morning she was the person who texted me the worst memes and left heart emojis on my late-night posts. The next day she had blocked me on everything. I called until my fingers went numb. She answered once and screamed like I'd broken a sacred rule, then hung up. There was no conversation, no explanation, only silence that screamed louder than her voice ever had. It was disorienting the way the world shifted. One day I had a map and the next every familiar landmark was gone. My mental health had already been fragile. Between October and April I'd been sinking under a clinical depression that I still sometimes have to explain to people who find it hard to take seriously. There was a stretch of time where every breath was a negotiation, a list of small chores I had to force myself to perform to keep existing. I attempted suicide during that period. That attempt has its own gravity and its own reasons, but none of that was Vivian's doing. I did not want sympathy or excuses. I wanted only to place the facts where they belonged. My depression was mine, messy and complicated, and when I came back from it I expected to find the fragments of my life still waiting for me. Instead, there was a new disaster, one crafted from words she spoke in corridors and late-night group chats, a reputation bought and sold like gossip at a fair. At first I brushed it off the way people brush off a splinter, assuming it would hurt for a second and then go away. Then I learned she wasn't whispering small things. She was rewriting my entire character to anyone who would listen. To my classmates she said I was obsessive, that I glued myself to her life in a way that made people uncomfortable. To teachers she implied I was unstable, emotionally volatile, useful labels when you want everyone else to step back. She told my friends and even our principal that I had been a problem, making them see me through a shader of caution and pity. She framed my recovery as drama and my silence as threat. People who I'd eaten pizza with 100 times started avoiding my table. When I walked past groups of students, laughter would stumble into silence. A friend would meet my eyes then look away as if the wrong thing might leap off my face. The cafeteria, once ordinary, became an arena where every eye was a judge. I felt my life shrink to the size of that judgment, to the small, damp pit of nausea that sat in my stomach every morning before class. The worst thing about being smeared like that is less the lies themselves than the helplessness that follows. There's something humiliating about needing to convince people you weren't what someone else says you are. I gathered what little proof I had, screenshots of messages where we teased each other, timestamps showing I was at a different place when she claimed I'd been stalking her, group chat logs where she herself had made jokes that contradicted her new narrative. I printed things out and organized them into folders like evidence in a case. I went to the counselor and to teachers with these folders and asked for fairness, for someone to at least read and consider the context. Some people listened and found their faces hot with shame, some apologized quietly, others simply shrugged and said, "Well, it's complicated." Complexity, by the way, is the liar's best friend. It makes people lazy and allows the simplest, most sensational story to hold because it's easier to remember. The stain on my name didn't wash away with proof, it just became something people mentally noted when my face entered the room. Those months were the loneliest I've ever known. I trained myself with small rituals to survive. Breathe in for 4, hold for 4, breathe out for 4, list 10 things in the room from left to right, force meals that I would eat without tasting them. A handful of people refused to let me disappear completely. Amir, my cousin, brought me chips and terrible pop music and the ability to laugh in a way that felt like oxygen. A couple of friends sat with me in silence because silence can be less damaging than words when everything else around you is noise. My therapist helped me practice a voice that could deliver facts without sobbing, a tone that would not be twisted into melodrama. Still, I learned something complicated. Facts can only armor you so far. People will choose an easy story over the real one when that's what fits their day. The rumor was a parasite that fed on attention, and it seemed to thrive every time someone turned away and whispered. It would have been easy at that point to go the wrong way. Revenge could have been a shout, a smear in return, pictures taken out of context in angry posts. The fantasy of ruins is intoxicating. I admit I entertained dark, petty fantasies where I exposed every cruel thing she had ever done, every lie returned in kind. But I had recently crawled back from something that nearly swallowed me whole. and I'd seen what desperate actions could lead to. I didn't want to be someone who handled pain by throwing another person into it. What I wanted was cleaner, colder, more precise. I wanted my name back. I wanted a version of justice that didn't drag me into the mud. I wanted the truth to be undeniable, to be presented in a way that made neutral observers have to reevaluate the story they'd been sold. And selfish as it sounds, I wanted Vivian to feel the weight of the consequences of her actions, that the narrative she tried to build would not hold up under scrutiny. So I began to plan quietly, carefully. Step 1 was documentation. I made a timeline on a notebook, and for every date I could recall, I wrote down what happened, who was there, and who had heard what. I printed messages, scrolled old group chats and screenshots, and cataloged them with timestamps. I reached out privately to people I trusted and asked for simple witness statements. Did you see me act that way? Were any of these accusations true? Some said yes, most said, I didn't notice that. Several close friends wrote short notes about the times I had been supportive or simply normal. Those notes felt like tiny lifeboats. I took my folder to the counselor and asked not for a witch hunt, but for an investigation into the pattern of rumors. The counselor listened. She didn't promise miracles, but she agreed that the school had a responsibility to keep a healthy environment. The second part of the plan was tone. I practiced dozens of ways to tell my side that wouldn't sound like pleading or ranting. My therapist coached me on voice control and clarity. We practiced saying things like, here are the facts, then listing them plainly. I wanted to be the adult in the room because adults tend to be treated like credible witnesses. That clarity mattered more than any dramatic confession or tearful outburst. I also made a promise to myself: expose the truth without exposing anyone's private messages in a way that could be construed as revenge porn or public shamming. I wanted accountability, not destruction. This was about reclaiming my story, not breaking hers into a million pieces. There were nights where the anger burned so hot I could taste metal, and then days where it cooled into disciplined resolve. I arranged meetings with teachers discreetly, handed them a concise timeline, and asked only that they consider what they'd heard in context. The principal, to his credit, read my folder and agreed to look into the matter formally. He arranged a mediated meeting, not the kind where accusations are thrown like grenades, but a controlled conversation where both sides would be heard and school policy could be enforced. I will not say it was a pleasant process. Being called into the office to explain yourself never is, but I also found a strange steadiness in preparing. Evidence became a kind of ritual. Each printed message, each witness note, felt like another plank in the bridge I was building back toward normal life. The day of the meeting came like an overly bright afternoon. The principal's office smelled faintly of lemon cleaner. He placed my timeline on the desk between us and asked me to explain calmly. I did. I spoke in short sentences. When my voice broke, I paused, swallowed, and resumed. He listened without interrupting. Then Vivian's name was called to the office. Watching her walk in was like seeing a character from my worst nightmares cross into daylight. Perfect hair, a look of wounded offense that she'd rehearsed, as if she had been wronged rather than the one doing the wrong. Later, the counselor told me she was already pulling the performance she thought would save her. She wanted to be perceived as the wounded party. But a performance can hide only so much when the other person walking into the room carries a stack of factual evidence. At the meeting, the counselor and principal reviewed my timeline and the corroborating statements. I watched Vivian's expression change from practiced outrage to something more ragged when she realized the principal wasn't dismissing the evidence out of hand. She tried to speak, to tell her version of events. There were words about feeling scared, about boundaries, about being overwhelmed, but their force was dented by the hard things on my folder. Messages that painted a different picture, timestamps that contradicted crucial claims. The principal spoke with a quiet firmness I'll never forget. He explained the school's policy on harassment and rumor mongering and said he would be taking measures, counseling for Vivian and limits on how she could engage with other students online and in person, and a formal note in the school records about the incident. He didn't want to be punitive, he wanted to ensure safety and fairness. That decision felt clinical, not dramatic, but the consequences were real. After the meeting, the principal requested a small corrective statement to be sent to the school community, not nomming Vivian or turning the situation into spectacle, but clarifying some facts so that the rumors' reach could be curtailed. It was a quiet thing, a paragraph in an email, but it diffused the tinder. People who had been on the fence reached out with apologies. A few friends who'd been distant sent messages asking if I was okay, and saying they regretted believing the narrative they'd heard. That, more than anything, felt like a salve. The correction wasn't a crowd of people gathering to gawk at Vivian's fall, but rather a small, steady movement back toward fairness. Some who had been cruel stayed away, some offered grudging apologies. A couple of teachers came by and asked if I needed time to recover. The principal had also suggested peer mediation, which I accepted cautiously. There's something strange about being asked to reconcile with someone who deliberately hurt you, but the school framed it as restoration rather than performative forgiveness. I won't pretend it ended in a single cathartic scene where the villain is unmasked in front of a roaring crowd. Real life is less cinematic and more like the slow untying of a knot you thought would never come loose. I did get a certain satisfaction when people who had whispered to each other in corners started looking me in the eye again. There was a small private payoff the day a teacher I'd always respected stopped me after class and said, "I'm sorry I didn't listen sooner. You were right." That small thing landed like a stone skipping across a pond. The ripples mattered. Vivian, for her part, was forced into counseling and told to stop certain behaviors. She was angry, of course. She complained to friends. She tried to mend fences in her own way, some genuine, some performative. I learned quickly to hold my expectations. Regret is not always visible. Sometimes the consequence of cruelty is only that the person who did it has to live with fewer friends, more suspicion, and a school that watches more closely. What surprised me most was the way the whole process changed my relationship with myself. For months I had been defined by other people's reactions. The room shrinking, the cold shoulders, the whispered jokes. As the hearings and statements and conversations wound down, something else settled in, an understanding that my life did not belong to someone else's narrative. Reclaiming my story was an act of re-ownership. I stopped apologizing for existing in a way that felt authentic to me. That wasn't petty revenge, that was reclamation. I worked more on my mental health and kept going to therapy, not because anyone told me to, but because I recognized how fragile recovery can be and how easy it is for other people's stories to slide under your skin if you're not careful. I rewired my boundaries, learned to say no without shrinking, and let go of the idea that friendships were guarantees instead of choices. There were tender, weird moments afterwards. A few friends returned, awkward at first, like people stepping back into a house where the furniture had been rearranged but the floor remained the same. Amir never left, he'd been there every step, a constant ridiculous presence who reminded me to eat and to laugh. Some days I felt triumphant, other days I felt exhausted, as if I had run a marathon that never ended. I didn't savor the outcome in the gross, gleeful way revenge stories sometimes promise. Instead, I felt relief that the lie had been checked and sorrow that it ever had legs. I learned how much energy it takes to defend yourself when your defense must be both moral and strategic. If there's one lesson that sits with me now, it's this: revenge that's just violence for violence's sake is hollow. What felt like true victory was the slow, careful restoration of my name, the way I could walk into a room and feel wider shoulders under my skin. That restoration didn't come from breaking Vivian down publicly, but from refusing to be erased by a story written about me without my consent. It came from evidence, from the quiet alignment of people who could choose to see the truth, from persistence, and from protecting my own mental well-being through it all. I still think about Vivian sometimes. I don't wish her harm. I hope she learns empathy, maybe through counseling, maybe through life's small, hard lessons. I do wish she understood how many doors closed for me because of her choices. The goal was never to punish, it was to insist that actions have consequences and that people can't casually weaponize narrative without being held accountable. If you're stuck in a similar place, smeared, isolated, wondering how to fight back, start with evidence, get support, and find a voice that's calm and clear. Violence and spectacle will only replicate the thing you want to stop. The best kind of payback is reclaiming your life in a way that keeps your humanity intact. To those who watched this and felt the same cold clutch of being misrepresented, you're not alone. It sucks, it's unfair, it's messy. But truth presented calmly and supported by witnesses is not a weak weapon, it's slow and exact. And to anyone feeling crushed under depression and betrayal alike, reach out, get help. I did, and it saved me. The rest, the restoration, the small apologies, the way the rumor cloud finally thinned, was a long, imperfect road. But I walked it and I came back to myself. That, in the end, felt like the truest revenge.